prolong your applause a little bit longer for Anna, please. Welcome to the stage.
Hello, I'm Anna Powell-Smith. I'm going to be talking about why don't we know who owns England. So my day job, I'm a developer and a product lead at a startup. This is very much not my day job. There is no money in this at all, sadly. So I want to talk about why it is that in some countries you can go and look at an online map and you can see who owns the land around you. So that's true in Denmark and parts of the US, for example. And in Britain, you cannot do that. There are no maps. The only way you can find out is you can search for an address on a Land Registry website and pay £10 and find out the details for that one address. If you're interested in knowing what a particular company owns, it's basically impossible. If you wanted to buy the entire data set, it would cost you many hundreds of millions of pounds. And once you had it, you wouldn't be able to do anything with it. You couldn't republish it, for example. So there are three things I'm going to talk about. The first is working with Private Eye to actually make one of the first maps of land ownership, which was a map of land owned by overseas companies in the UK. Second is why some of this matters, like is it actually important, do we care? And the third one is a project I've been involved in for a couple of years, which is trying to find out more of this stuff and free up some of this information called Who Owns England? And this is the opposite of Tom's talk. It's not about facts that don't exist. It's about facts that definitely do exist, but that we don't have access to. So Private Eye, I assume everybody's heard of. It's kind of like this combination of investigative journalism and jokes. So in 2015 and 2016, they did a load of reporting, a special report on land in England being sold to offshore companies, so tax haven-based companies. And they wrote stories about the Crown Estate selling off land and dictators owning big houses in London and money laundering and so on. And I was lucky enough to work with them, mapping some of that stuff and making an online version of the map. So this happened because in 2014, my friend Christian Eriksen, who's a journalist there, made an FOI request to Land Registry saying, can you give me details of all the property sold in the last 9 years to companies based overseas? And absolutely amazingly, they did tell him. They released the information to him. And it was an Excel file of 75,000 rows, and it looked like that. It was a load of title numbers and a load of company names. So there were some innocent-looking ones like Lidl, and there were some kind of slightly mysterious-looking ones. And he was like, wow. And the next day they said, that was a mistake, can we have it back? And he said, well, I'm a journalist for Private Eye, so what do you think? And so instead, what we did was we made a map and we put it online. So that you can see is the centre of London. The amount of property owned overseas in the centre of London is astonishing. The orange polygons are land-owned freeholds, and the purple dots are leasehold things like flats and so on. The map, you can go and look at it. That's the URL, privateeye.co.uk registry. It has 75,000 properties on it, owned by 25,000 companies, and two-thirds, so some are perfectly innocent things like Lidl, German company, fine, they own property, whatever. Two-thirds are companies based in tax havens or secrecy jurisdictions, so Panama, Caymans, Bahamas, that sort of thing. And the reason people do this is one of two reasons, either to avoid tax, because it used to be the case you paid much less tax if you did that, stamp duty and that sort of thing, or if you are essentially somebody who doesn't want people to know what you own, if you're a money launderer or a dictator or just, So here is, sorry, these are a bit rubbish quality, but this is York. Up there you can see some land owned outside of York, Thorpe Underwood in the British Virgin Islands. Here is centre of York. That's the river. You can see some townhouses there owned on Ousegate by a Bahamas company. And the thing about this is so that company, MDDT Nominees SA, there is no way of finding out who's behind that. And there is no way of knowing where their money's come from. So curiously, in March 26, Private Eye said, we're going to release our data set, we're going to put it online. Curiously, the same week, Land Registry said they were going to publish data set, when they did. After lots and lots of campaigning work by people like Global Witness, Transparency International, lots of stories by Richard Brooks and Christian Eriksen and Private Eye, there's been kind of progress on this. So this year, the Tax Havens Bill got passed, which said that companies owned in British overseas territories would have to be more transparent about who owns them. And just this week at Tory conference, Theresa May said we're going to do some work on taxing offshore ownership higher. However, that was the only map that's ever been published of land ownership in the UK. And I'm going to make completely unverifiable and fact-free statement that it is England's biggest secret. So if we'd done this the official way, it would have cost us £150,000 to build the map just for our own use, and it would have cost us at least £1 million to publish it. As it was, we did it for free with a dataset called Inspire. We paid the Land Registry about £500 to do some mapping that we needed, and we had the gigantic legal shield of private eye, which made me publish it at all. That's the dataset called Inspire. That's the centre of York. What this dataset is a European dataset of the land ownership polygons. These are the registered bits of land in York. You can see that some bits of land aren't registered, so the station isn't. Some of that up there isn't, some of that up there isn't. But most of the Land Registry knows who owns that. This dataset is freely available, but it has no information in it. That's all you get. And I can't, you're not allowed to republish it as well, so I'm not allowed to show you this map. It's a secret map. We can't publish these maps. The only reason we have them at all is because the European Union said in 2006 every country in Europe has to publish this. Britain fought it, they argued furiously it shouldn't happen, they were eventually forced to do it. They made it as useless as possible by removing all the information about who owned everything and the identifiers and saying it couldn't be republished. So the other thing we can't do is you can't do the same analysis again, because the way I built that map was we took the title numbers, we paid Land Registry to match them to the identifiers in Inspire, and ever since the map came out, they've been refusing to do that. They won't do any requests that are similar, and they were very unhappy that we'd done it at all, basically. So why does any of this matter? Sorry for this terrible graph. My day job is making graphs. This is a graph of the price of farmland in the UK, and it starts in 1994 and it ends in 2016. What you can see is that since 2004, the price has gone up by about 5 times. So farmland used to be about £2,000 an acre, and it's now about £8,000 to £10,000 an acre on average. This is for various reasons, but the impact is that it's very hard to build houses, as we know. Across the policy spectrum, people are starting to notice this. We have the left wing on the left, the APPR, and we have the right wing on the right, the conservative think tank Onward, both starting to publish reports saying, actually, land is really about what's going on with housing. And last month, a huge variety of organisations wrote to the housing minister and said, look, we need to start thinking about land more seriously. So the usual suspects like Shelter and NEF, but also people you wouldn't expect, like Campaign to Protect Rural England. So that's why land matters. Who does own England? We're trying to find out. So this is a project I've been involved in the past 2 years. It's called whoownsengland.org. It was set up by a chap called Guy Shrubsole, who's a writer and a campaigner. And we're trying to find out what we can and map what we can, which is very difficult because there's very little public information. And it's even if we have it, we can't really republish the maps. But what Guy has done is FOI'd everybody he can think of, or just written to people and saying, could you tell me what you own? If you know what you own, can you tell it? Can we share it? So this map, we've managed to map about 8%. We've got what the Forestry Commission owns, the Ministry of Defence, the RSPB, the National Trust, the Crown Estate actually told us, which is amazing. And if you go to the website, you can see what we've done. And there's also tons of investigations on there about how can we find out more, what do we know. Land Registry is denying everything we send them. They're just refusing on various grounds, including things they previously released Christian. They now say we can't have. Christian himself has been classified as a vexatious requester, which is astonishing, given that he's an investigative journalist and it's his job to make requests. If you only know one thing, the important thing to know is 1% of the population in Britain owns about half of the land, and we know that from looking at farm statistics. So we know the number of farms, we know how much land they cover, and we know how many farmers there are roughly. So we know at least that much. There aren't any official statistics. So Scotland, for example, is looking at improving this, having some official statistics about land concentration. That's kind of the best we can do. We do know that from Christian's previous FOI requests, we know that UK companies own about 6.5 million acres. The area of England and Wales is 37 million acres. So they own sort of, I guess that's about 20%. The biggest owners are things like water companies, mining companies. The top 50 companies own about 1 million acres. Tesco's in there. If you go to the blog, you can read more about this. Local authorities and county councils own about 1.5 million acres. Lots of it's in sort of undesirable areas like moorland, but a lot of it could be used for housing. Other UK corporate bodies own 5 million acres. The Ministry of Defence has 750,000, which they're selling off some of. The Forestry Commission, and so on. The Crown and the Church own a lot of land. Overseas companies, 280,000 acres, of which 80% is owned by offshore companies. More land is owned by companies based in Jersey, in England, than the entire area of Jersey. The rest belongs to individuals and trusts, so the remaining 75-80% is owned by individuals, and we don't know who that is, don't know who those people are, we don't know how much they're selling it for, and so on, but we are working it out. If this is of interest, then we're at whoownsengland.org. We've got lots of resources for people who want to do more in their local area, and we have maps, and get in touch if you're interested. Thanks a lot.
Well, that's staggering. To be frank, that's just, thank you for peeling back the lid on something that is just massively eye-opening. Where is this going? What's your vision for this project?
We'd like to make a map of the entire country, and we'd particularly like it if people could say, well, what does Tesco actually own?
Yep.
Show me. And we particularly like it if people who live in a particular town or village could see who owns the land around them. Not just that, but also who controls it. So it's very common for housing developers to take options out on land, and so things can't be built there because they've got an option controlling what can be done.
Okay.
We'd like people to have better knowledge about that.
Okay, so the first stage is really name and shame. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And then there are, there are policy changes that could be useful. So when when planning permission is taken out on land, the land goes up in value. Many people are starting to say, actually, currently all of that increase in value goes to the person who owns it. Some of that value should go to the people around in the community who've helped make it a nice place to build houses or live or whatever. Yeah. Go for infrastructure or local
Okay, so this is the first step towards more equitable policy.
Yeah,
basically.
But you can't really do that kind of policy work unless you've got the information to start with.
Yeah.
We don't know how housing developers are controlling land. We don't know how much they own. None of that's known.
It's crazy. And does this, you're presenting it as a particularly British problem. Mm-hmm. What is it that makes it uniquely British? Does this go back to Magna Carta, or is this something about our contemporary culture?
I had an extra slide which had a gigantic pound sign on. There's two problems. One is that this used to be a particularly British problem, and it's sort of scarred deep into our political culture. So the reason we have the Parliament Act, which says that the House of Parliament can push things through the House of Lords if the House of Lords object, that was due to a battle over land ownership. So in 1911, Lloyd George wanted to introduce land value tax, and he couldn't do it. And it went 3 times to the House of Lords, and they threw it out. And then there was a gigantic fight saying, we want to push this through. And the Parliament Act was introduced, and then it was the First World War. And then it didn't happen. But that exists because of the old fight over land ownership. Yeah. And the second problem is we're fairly unique in Europe and most of the world in that we sell all our geographical data. So it's not open, it's not free, we sell it to companies. And that makes it really, really hard to do any kind of open work with it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
It sounds massively complicated to unwind. I guess the link for me between the first two talks is sort of open information and the power of open information. Have you had any conversations with the investigative journalists you're working with about technologies that can help?
Yes. Private Eye are not the most tech kind of minded people. But there are loads of people doing work on this, doing really amazing work on this.
Yeah.
Open Knowledge Foundation and people.
Don't tell Doug from the previous session, but blockchain is finding some applications in this area for land registries and things like that.
Yeah.
I'm going to invite anybody from the panel to weigh in. This is such a sort of specific, unique topic. Yeah.
I need to, somehow absolve myself from my prior comment. What do you think is the role of Companies House in this? Because obviously Companies House does that, we publish everything here, but anything that comes into the country then, do they have any reaction to the work that you're doing?
Companies House are actually pretty great. So Companies House have made all their data really open. They've got an API. They've done the work on beneficial ownership, so who the real owners of a UK company, all that's now public.
But it doesn't, as you pointed out, if someone owns a piece of property, blah, blah, blah company, then there's no kind of open register of that.
No, but the bill that was passed this year is if your company is based in a British overseas territory, which is overseas.
Well, what if it isn't, right?
Well, quite. So we need international action. But it's quite a positive development because at least we can do it in the British territories if it happens, which it may not.
Thank you. URL for the blog that you mentioned?
Sorry?
The URL for the blog.
Oh, whoownsengland.org.
Sorry, say again?
whoownsengland.org.
Thank you very much. And a round of applause for Anna, please.